just let them in and they can catch as catch can. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the Education Director for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. And like I said, I want to thank everybody for showing up on this fantastic Friday night, joining us for our virtual movie night discussion. Tonight, we're talking about the 1989 film Born on the 4th of July. But before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support and all of our free programming, or all of our free virtual programming, I should say. Not just our movie nights, our trivia nights, all the other virtual programs that we do, and of course, support for the foundation coming in the memory at Finley. So thank you to the Finley family as well for continuing to support our endeavors here at the museum. And again, thank you to everybody who is joining us tonight for our discussion. Like I said, tonight we are watching the 1989 film Born on the 4th of July, directed by Oliver Stone, who I know many of you are familiar with, at least through the movies, maybe Scarface or Platoon or Wall Street. Cinematography for this film was done by Robert Richardson, and you can find some of his films, Casino, Few Good Men, and Inglourious Basterds, which I am definitely watching after we're done here tonight. For some reason, I just have been jonesing to watch that movie for the past week or so. Of course, this movie stars Tom Cruise, one of his breakout performances, not his first role, but certainly one of his breakout performances. It also stars Kyra Sedgwick, Frank Whaley, and Willem Dafoe. It was shot mostly in Texas around the Dallas area, but some of the Vietnam scenes and the scenes from Mexico were filmed in the Philippines. Principal photography was conducted between October of 1988 and December of 1988. This movie was produced by, I hope I'm saying this right, Istlan Productions, distributed by Universal Pictures, with a release date of December 20th of 1989, a budget of $17.8 million, and they brought in almost a whopping $100 million in box office receipts above their budgets, with a box office total of $162 million. So well done to them for that. That was a big boom for Universal Pictures in that department. And of course, as always, we get started off by just going around the room and seeing how everybody liked the film. Chris, you're first up on my list tonight. What did you think?
I liked it a lot. Excuse me. This was the second time I'd seen it. I saw it when it first came out, so it's been a long time. And I appreciated it much more this time around. Okay.
Mike, you're up next on my list. How did you enjoy the film? No? Okay, we'll move on to Sally. Sally, how about you?
There we go. I liked it a lot. I've seen it a couple times. I haven't seen it in a year or two, but I really enjoy it.
All right, Russell?
I've never seen any of Oliver Stone's films before, so it was new. This was new from that format. I can't say that I liked the film. I don't think it's a film that you can really like. I mean, I found it very troubling. I found it very difficult. I turned it off quite a few times and walked away because I just needed to, I lived through that time. So it was also bringing back all these memories of things. And it was, so it had many good points. It had a number of bad points. So I thought it was mixed.
Okay. And then Jose, how about you? How did you like the film?
I saw this film many years ago, but that impacted me at that time. When I saw the film yesterday, I tried to I don't know. Yeah, I tried to recapitulate if I could remember some things, but it was a new experience for me. I really liked it.
Okay, excellent. I had the same problem. Well, I don't know if it's a problem. I had the same take to the film that Russell did. It took me a few times. I didn't see it when it first came out. I hadn't seen it till we started watching it for this movie night discussion. And I did find some parts of it disturbing. Very hard to watch, very hard to stomach. I did have to stop it, just like Russell, on several occasions, take a step back for a few minutes, kind of get my senses. It's kind of a brutal assault on your senses at some points. And so I found it difficult to watch. And like, I would agree with Russell and his point. I don't think this is a movie that you can like. simply because the content is just so hard to deal with. You know, you might enjoy the film, but I don't think it's a film that you can like, simply because of the subject matter involved and how they go about presenting.
Well, I think that, I mean, when you say, what did you think of the film? And you say you like the film, I mean, I think like has a lot of dimensions when you're talking about something like that. I mean, I think it's a film that, I mean, I liked it in the sense that I thought it told a very compelling story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, in that sense, it's a movie to like. It's a movie that I think deserves a lot of respect for the story that it does tell. But I can understand yours and Russell's point of view that you know, it's a troubling movie because of what it tells us about the culture at the time, and how what I saw was the big mix of religion and war that pervaded this.
And that kind of, I mean, Chris, you always do a great job of segueing right into my question. And that segues right into the very first question I have. And I talk about the opening scenes of the film where they're portraying Ron's early life. And I'm just wondering how important that was to introducing this character to the audience and setting the stage for the rest of the film. And I was wondering everybody else's impression on that.
Well,
I
I
thought it was
thought,
critical.
go
ahead,
ahead,
Zach.
Chris.
I
Yours is
thought-
better.
Ladies first.
I thought it was critical. I thought you really needed to
Yeah.
see how he was growing up in this, you know, kind of white bread town on Long Island. Just as an aside, I discovered when looking at his biography that he was born in Ladysmith, Wisconsin.
You know, and I do a ton of research for these, and I never came across that fact at all.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and I wasn't able to find when he moved to Massapequa, but yeah, he was born in Ladysmith, Wisconsin.
He must have been at a very early age because he was very young in Massapequa.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, where is Ladysmith?
Where is it?
Do you know?
Somewhere way north, I think.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know.
Fair enough.
But in any event, I think it was critical because you really get a sense of, you know, even as a kid, he's really into this hero in the sense of being a warrior. And it kind of resonated with me because I remember when I was growing up, I had kind of a similar thing. I remember taking out my dad's golf clubs and pretending they were a rifle, you know, that kind of thing. In high school, my best friend and I, my house was near an elevated railroad track, and we would go out occasionally and pretend that like we were guerrillas on the side of the railway waiting for the train to come by so we could attack it, you know, that kind of thing. So I could really, it really resonated with me, and I thought it worked really well in terms of setting him up for the trauma that he experienced later.
Sally, did you have some thoughts on that?
He said it eloquently. I agree. I think we had to see where he grew up and where he started. I remember my brother and his G.I. Joe dolls and my dad teaching him how to, you know, use the bayonet and blow up stuff and all that kind of thing. And that's just how boys were raised in the 50s and 60s. That's how it was.
Before we go any further, Mike, welcome. Or I'm sorry,
Hey.
Mike, and then Mark as well. Mark, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, it reminded me of growing up at that age. And I had uncles that served in the Air Force and the Army. And I don't know, I just grew up as being like, you got to serve your country somehow, you know. I joined and I was really excited about being in the military. And I thought, I'm doing a great thing. But then you realize later on that all the lies and the way the troops were treated, both in country and then when they got home. I thought when I saw these things about the VA, I was stunned. I just thought, how can you treat people like animals like that?
Well, and that's one of my questions as we move further down, and I want to save that for a minute. Otherwise, I think the discussion might get bogged down for the rest of the night in that, at least from my point of view.
Yes.
Anyway. I
I
think
was
you
ju-
guys
I
are
was-
right. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Who's
Oh,
that?
I was just going to say that I, for the most part, agreed with what everyone else has said, except for the fact that I thought it was a little too long. I looked because I was sitting here and thinking, and I looked, it was 35 minutes and he was still talking. It was still the setup of, going through the how many parades do we need to go through? And then I wasn't sure the whole point of that wrestling. Why did we need that wrestling scene where he lost? I wasn't quite sure. I thought that surely could have been edited. I did not see any real importance to that scene, but maybe I'm missing something.
Actually, what I got, and I was kind of thinking the same thing until the end of the wrestling scene, and you see his mother's reaction. And I put a question in here later on about his mother when they have that big argument. And I don't want to go too much into that right now because I don't want to move too far ahead. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think that opening scene was a little long, but I think that wrestling portion of it, I think it was critical. And I'll tell you why when we get to that point. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I found the wrestling sequence really important in the whole thing. I wrestled in high school, so I kind of felt the agony that he was going through in that. But the way he loses and his reaction to his loss in the conference championship really kind of told you a lot about his character, about how important it was for him to win.
And up to that point, whatever he had done, he had kind of excelled at,
Exactly.
for lack of a better term. And so for that turnaround right there, for him to not win and to get beaten in such important moment, you're right. I think that did have an impact on him moving forward and an impact on the film as well.
I think the parts about the wrestling training that he was going through, it was so reminiscent, and it's one of the reasons I think that dealing with a later question you have, why Oliver Stone could leave out the basic training aspect of it. I mean, you watch the scenes of the coach yelling at them, calling them ladies and that kind of thing. Very reminiscent of what we saw in Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, and this is in high school.
Yeah.
When I saw that part, it kind of took me back to All Quiet on the Western Front. Having the teacher just inundate the students with this ethos, and I was kind of taken aback. For those of you who did go through high school at this time, did you experience anything like that? Did you really have any teachers who were, for lack of a better term, I guess, little drill sergeants? I hope
Yes.
not.
It was at that age, it was very important athletics. I mean, it was part of who you were.
Sure.
And I mean, I did track and football and all different kinds of stuff. So it was important to me, and it kind of links into you're dating a girl, you're kind of popular, and and you're an athlete, and it just kind of, like you said, it shows his character that he was always in it to win it.
But
Yeah.
I thought the ladies part, calling them ladies, to me that was a bit over the top. I can't imagine a high school teacher using that terminology, but maybe I'm wrong.
Wrong.
Quite honestly, Russell, I would use that term nowadays if I was, around a group of kids. Certainly not as derisively as he was using it then. But I mean, that's a term that I would probably use just from my Army background. It's just a word that would come out. It doesn't really mean what other people might think it mean, but it's just a term. Come on, ladies, let's get going. Come on. It would just come out. I'm sorry to say, even to this day, it would for me.
I had a football coach in high school who wasn't quite that drill sergeant-y, but he was pretty tough, and he'd get in your face the way that coach did. The one thing that struck me was that none of the coaches I had, or that I think coached any of the other sports that I wasn't part of, would have ever been that aggressive, that derisive, as you say. And I kind of wondered whether that, I went to schools that were not in, shall we say, a blue collar area. And I was just wondering whether there might have been a class difference in terms of how the coaches dealt with those students as opposed to how they dealt with students in the schools I went to.
It's
I
possible.
went to school in a very blue collar area, and I grew up in I was very blue collar, but and the gym teachers, I mean, they were strict. They made you do all sorts of exercises, and the ropes and all those things were perfectly adequate. It's just that tone of voice and that choice of words. I can't even imagine in my situation, that being the case. Eric, I just want to add one thing. I don't know if you mentioned All Quiet on the Western Front. I don't know if you saw it was on the bookshelf in the film.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, as a matter of fact, right, it absolutely was, and I did notice it right away. It was one of my favorite books, one of my favorite films, and yeah, they didn't make the reference discreet at all, not at all.
I thought it was also interesting that you also saw a copy of Johnny Got His Gun,
Yeah,
which we also saw in Tigerland with Colin Farrell.
yeah, and that movie's tough to watch. That's a very difficult movie to watch. There's some portions of this film, just from an acting standpoint, that I thought were well overdone. And certainly that wrestling coach, that was one of the points where I just kind of had to skip forward a little bit. I thought that acting was just a little too over the top. It was a little ridiculous. It might have been on point, but just for the way that they presented it in film, I really didn't. That it wasn't a selling point for me. I just, like I said, I just thought it was overacted, and it probably, that section of it anyway, could have been taken out. The wrestling scene itself, where he lost, not so much, but that gym coach, while I understand, I didn't think that was acted very well. My 2 cents.
I wanted to add, something. I got through.
Hello, Lisa. No, you froze up now. Lisa? No? All right. We'll come back to Lisa. She'll sign out and sign back in again. So as we're watching Ron grow up and we're watching his interactions with his family, what they're seeing on the TV, not only as far as, the politics that they're watching goes, but they're also watching highlights or newsreels from the war itself coming in the early years. What were some of the motivations that spurred Ron on to join the Marine Corps? Why did he have such a deep desire to go and do this very dangerous thing, do you think?
Struck me that the whole thing with the God and country thing was really
Big time, right?
major focus of that. I wanted to note though what I thought was one chronological problem in the movie, and that was when they watch John Kennedy giving his inaugural. I think that Kovic was way too young in that scene. He would have been 15 years old, but he looked like he was about 8 or 10. But I think the God and country, and then that inspiration, ask not what your country can do for you, et cetera. I mean, it seemed to be a big part of his growing up.
Well, and what else was, what else was behind the scenes at that time as well? What was the big instigator for looking over your shoulder every day?
Communism.
Communism.
Oh, God, right? And they, they punched that home time and time again in that first 23 minutes. And especially when they're all sitting as a family, watching the TV, what his father's saying, what his mother's saying. And I thought it was kind of fascinating that while his mother and father are both saying the same thing, they're saying it very differently.
I thought it was interesting, though, that the father said, a long way to go to fight a war. And then I think that came up again later in the film. So I thought that was significant that the son was more gung-ho, inspired by Kennedy, than his father seemed to be about this particular war.
Yeah, and didn't his father go a long way to fight a war too, though?
Yeah.
That's kind of was my thought as we were talking about all this in the beginning, is, kids from this time, a lot of their parents were in World War II. They were fighting over in Europe or fighting over in the Pacific. And I think that's...
Sorry, then
No, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, he encounters an older veteran in the bar scene. I think it's in Mexico. And was one of the most significant moments for me, that that the World War II vet was hanging on to the greatness of his service, and Kovic was completely disillusioned by that.
And understandably, I mean, they were two very different wars, conducted two very different ways for two very different reasons.
I know in our family that was World War II was talked about a lot, and it was I don't want to say it was the last good war we had, but I mean it seemed like the whole country was behind World War II, where
Absolutely.
Vietnam, nobody wanted it. You know, it was just the wrong time, the wrong fight.
Well,
And that's for a lot of different reasons too, though. I mean, you have social, economic, political reasons that really divided a lot of people between those wars, whereas you didn't really have that in World War II. You know, we were attacked. We were on the good side. We were on the side of right. And like Mike said, it was quite possibly the last, you know, noble or good war, except for maybe Operation Desert Storm. But sorry, I got to get my cheap plug in. But no, you're not wrong. After that,
but I might have misspoke, because now that I'm thinking back, the guy in the bar was not World War II aged, was he? Maybe it was Korean War that he was valuing. So that came in between, and that, you know, that was not a complete victory, but it wasn't a mess like Vietnam.
yeah, there was quite a few bar scenes. So I'm not, and it seemed like each one he encountered a different veteran of some sort or another. So you might not be wrong, Mark. You might not be wrong at all.
But I think respect is the key there. The World War II veterans were respected no matter, even when they were in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were always respected.
Yeah, and like I said, you know, that is still even today. You know, that is seen as a very noble, a very passionate, and on the side of right sort of war. You know, of course, you know, we don't have to go into this at all, but you know, Vietnam certainly is not seen that way. Wasn't then, still isn't now, depending on who you talk to. It's tough, especially for those Vietnam vets. You know, you go off thinking that you're going to be doing this righteous thing. And as we saw straight out from the first interaction of Ron in Vietnam, things go south real fast. You know, you don't know how or who is going to be in front of you, and it's tricky. Going right into that, you know, I want to talk about the Vietnam sections of that. And the first thing I noticed when they went from Ron and his upbringing, and then they cut straight into Ron and his second tour in Vietnam, talking to the young private. He's a sergeant now, and he's got lots of combat experience. And here's this brand new private who doesn't even know if he's going to live throughout his first day. What kind of differences did you notice between Ron in that opening sequence and Ron in Vietnam?
I think he was more sober. He knew they were in for a fight, and it probably wasn't the right fight. So
Did he know it was not the right fight right at that point? Did he still think he was on the side of the righteous at that point?
Well, I don't know if he was on the side of the righteous, but I think he realized that the whole mission was to get home.
Oh, okay. No, that's a good point, for sure. As opposed to winning the war, being victorious, the whole thing is just to survive and make it back to your family. All right.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that kind of came through in the statement he made to Wilson when he asked him where he was from, and Wilson says Venus, Georgia, and then Kovic says, "Well, I never seen anybody from Georgia get hurt or get killed." So,
but how many times did he said that to young privates, no matter where they were?
Sure, no, I'm sure that's the case, but that I think that was just his way of. You know, instead of going all gung ho and everything, it was his way of kind of giving the guy some reassurance that he was going to get through it, which of course he didn't.
No.
I agree with you, but I noticed that a little bit later, I think it was the same scene where they're preparing or deciding whether to attack the village, and his commanding officer says, there was a gun there. Did you see it? Did you see it?
Yeah.
And he didn't seem to see it. We didn't see it, but he agreed with him. So he was
Right.
still going along with that attitude.
Before we move along too much further, I see Lisa is back and she did have a point to make earlier. Lisa, I want to move to you real quick. Nope, you're muted.
Okay. All
There
right.
you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So my point was, and it's real quick, but being a female on here, I want to say that whenever a group of men is addressed as ladies, it sounds derogatory, at least in my ears. It's almost like when you have the pep rallies and the football players come out dressed as cheerleaders.
Okay.
It seems mocking. It seems very mocking, and it seems like you're trying to dig at them and tell them at that moment they're less than. So as a woman, it feels derogatory. End of
That's a
point.
Fair point. That's a very fair point. And perhaps if that, and I know it will, I know that word's going to come, at least trying to come out of my mouth at some point again. And next time I'll try my best to check myself, because you do bring up a fair point. That's like, saying, okay, dogs, or, come on, skunks, or something like that. You're bringing those people down to a level that is lesser. And to say ladies are lesser is not fair. You're absolutely right. Thanks for bringing that up.
It's difficult, to get to learn those kind of things that if you grow up with them. And I think that the film is very much showing that the way that Kovic grew up with attitudes that he eventually did a 180 on. And that's why I really like this film, though it's difficult to watch, is he became a tragic character because he was honorable and admirable especially in his optimism after he was wounded, to keep fighting to walk again. And yet that backfired on him. He broke his leg. And so the film really showed us how his attitudes were flawed. And then we see him, convert to the other side regarding the war.
Yeah, and I think you're right with the tragic hero reference. And I think that's one of the things that made it, at least for me, a little difficult to watch, was that transition. He fought it super hard, and you could see from the very beginning where it was going. But to watch his stubbornness and to watch him cling to these ideologies for so long, and like you said, even after he was wounded, even after he came home and saw how he was being treated, he still clung to these. And I think just that alone made it really difficult to watch, at least in my opinion.
I think one of the interesting things about the movie was that his perspective on what it meant to love America changed so much.
Chris, do you think we see that nowadays as well? And no, you know what, never mind, sorry. I don't want to ask that because I don't want, I'm opening up a can of worms there that we probably don't want to get into, and it's got nothing to do with the movie. My bad, I'm not going to ask that question.
But I just think it was a matter of his transformation, the way he viewed love of America as being, going to war or whatever it was. And he came to realize that as a result of his experience in war, there was something more to patriotism than just being a warrior.
That's well put. And I also remember when he came home and had the fight with his brother, and he kept saying, love it or leave it, love it or leave it, because he was still rehearsing and hanging on to the value of his having gone to fight. But by the end of the movie, he's found a different way to love America, to fight against corruption.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I think you can love your country without absolutely believing or buying in 100% to what it's doing. And maybe that was the point I was trying to make with my last ill-timed question. Yeah, maybe, perhaps. So Ron's over in Vietnam. Mistakes are made. Civilians are killed. And this is not an uncommon occurrence over there. Probably not in any war, as a matter of fact. But they do their best. They move on. But then in the resulting melee, the resulting mayhem, Ron does shoot Wilson. What did you guys think? I mean, obviously, you know, things happen on the battlefield, especially the way they portrayed that scene. The sun's coming down in his eyes. There's a lot of confusion on the battlefield. People are yelling and screaming. I mean, quite honestly, when I knew it was coming, you could see it delivered a mile away, and I still couldn't find myself to fault him at all for that.
I didn't fault him either. I thought it was just the whole fog, the whole mess that you know, they were retreating, they were in panic, and you know, he just was trying to stay alive, you know.
In that moment when I was watching the film, I wasn't sure it wasn't an enemy soldier that he shot at. I couldn't see it clearly either, the way they depicted it.
Sure, sure. But then he goes along to his commander afterwards, and you know, he wants to clear his conscience. He wants to get this off his chest. He confesses what he's done, and his commander just, I don't want to hear that. That's not what happened. I don't want to hear that. Report back to your station, your duty post or whatever, and let's carry on. What did you think about that as far as the commander goes? His major at the time.
Very poor leader.
The poor leader, you say, Mike?
Yes.
Why do you think
Go
that?
ahead.
Well, I mean, you know, he was responsible for his troops, and I mean, if something happened that was not supposed to happen, he should have followed through on it. And you know, not, I don't know, if I didn't want to see him disciplined, or, you know, but it was important for history to know that, you know, shit happens, you know.
I think that back in that time, that was probably the way that things were handled. Now, I think we would expect, you know, them to be a little more compassionate, a little more understanding. We would have expected him to maybe talk to him in a nicer way and kind of help him over that. But I think back then, that wasn't it. This is war. You're a man. You know, just deal with it. And I think that's just that was portrayed the way it would have been.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Russell. You know, certainly like I said, maybe no discipline, you know, but let's take him off the battlefield for a few days. Let's give him a little bit of counseling. You know, let's just let him clear his head, try to work his mental mind space through that, instead of just turning him right around, sending him back out. Go do your.
I had kind of a cynical view of what the officer was doing, which was that he didn't want to do the paperwork.
And that's another thing, you know, absolutely. That was one of my secondary thoughts, Chris, is yeah, that's going to require some paperwork. I'm going to have to answer some questions to some higher authorities as a major. I don't want to do that. And it might create a little bit of disruption amongst the platoon as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting the way that Kovac found his own therapy, not with a therapist, but, you know, through going to see his girlfriend, and then actually going to meet with the family of the soldier he killed. And, you know, that's what might be encouraged if someone were in therapy, but he discovered it himself, which took a lot of bravery.
Lisa, do you have something?
Yeah, I thought that he knew the truth. I thought was he a colonel?
Major.
Major. Sorry, I don't know him.
That's
The major,
okay.
I think he knew the truth. He didn't want to hear the truth.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want to hurt. Well, I don't know. It would be maybe harder for the family. As you could tell, the family had kind of put it to peace. And they felt honor for their son and everything. And so sharing that he was killed by friendly fire would be harder to share. Also, he didn't want his soldier to be dealing with it. He knew the truth.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. And like, you know, a couple of us have said, excuse me, that truth would have, you know, both up and down the chain would have caused problems. Problems that they don't need. They got enough problems over there already. Why create more problems? was something that could just be brushed under the rug. And that's, and I think Russell said it well. That's, that's kind of was the mindset then.
One other thing I wanted to add is, if you're in a battle situation like that, would you even have the time to do that, though? I mean, so much is going on. Does that major really have the time to deal with each individual situation like that? I don't think he would realistically have had the time to do much more than what he did.
No, yeah, you're not wrong, for sure. Moving along, so Ron is injured, and I'm sorry, I found that whole sequence just once again, a little too over the top. Here you have a guy who's on his second tour in Vietnam. He gets wounded in the ankle, and so his first instinct is to put himself in an upright position with no cover at all and start firing on the enemy. I was just like, no, that's the last thing somebody in their second tour in Nam would do. And so he ends up paying the ultimate price. He gets severely wounded, and he gets shipped back to the US, to the Bronx, and we're at the VA hospital now. Just briefly, let's talk about that whole scenario. Wow. I'm no expert on VA hospitals back in the late 60s, early 70s, but my God, was it really like that? Do you think that was an accurate portrayal of what VA hospitals were like? I hope not.
Yeah, I think it was. I really think that one of the things that I think that every veteran, post-Vietnam anyway, should be thanking Vietnam veterans for is how aggressive they were in demanding the kind of treatment that veterans should have, particularly those who've been in combat. Whether it was finally getting PTSD recognized as something that was real, demanding that they get the rehabilitation services and so on. But I do think it was that bad, and I don't know how to explain it or sort of quantify it, but the accounts that some of the stuff that I've read about that time for those who came back was terrible. I think this was part of. I watched an interview of Oliver Stone when he was asked why he had done Platoon, which the interviewer described as the quintessential Vietnam movie. And so he was asked, why did you do Born on the 4th of July? And he said, it was the Iliad and the Odyssey, that you have the warriors at war, and then you have to bring them back. And so this was Platoon was at war, Born on the 4th of July was bringing them home. And so he saw that as kind of bookends for what the Vietnam War was about. And I think this was his way of describing what it was like for a veteran to come home. And I think there were a couple of books that were written by a psychologist with the VA, the Department of Veterans Administration, relying on the Iliad and the Odyssey. One was called, I took down the titles. One was called Achilles in Vietnam: Combat Trauma and the Undoing of Character. And I think that's what we were seeing in those scenes, both in Platoon and then here when he's in Vietnam. And then the other one is called Odysseus in America: Combat Trauma and the Trials of Homecoming. And as I was watching this movie and I was watching the interview, I was thinking, because I've read both of these books, it really did kind of really play to what this psychiatrist or psychologist was talking about, and the conditions that the veterans had to endure.
I would just say that the VA has, come, around a lot, and they're much, much better. But you still, all through the years, you're kicking and dragging them into the 21st century. It's so frustrating, you know. I mean, just the basic care, and then I don't know, in the funding and the resources. You know, I go to the VA, and I have primary care doctor, and I've had a primary care doctor, a different one for, let's say, I had 5 different ones over the 6 years I've been going there. So, I mean, there's just no consistency there still. But I mean, I don't want to knock the VA, because, you know, they've come a long way, but they got a long way to go too yet. I guess the toxic sites too are another thing. I mean, I was, I don't know. The DOD did studies about, you know, all the toxic sites, you know, and I don't know. It's frustrating. You know, you gotta drag
Things like
along.
that.
What's that?
You're talking about like burn barrels and things like that, Mike?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very familiar with that. PACT Act and that kind of stuff. So
I
Yeah.
want a second.
Go ahead.
I want
Lisa.
a second, Mike. Mike, my father, I take him to the VA, and yes, it offers something that people wouldn't have, but oh my gosh, it has a long way to go. It is nowhere like what was in the movie, but sometimes it's just beyond ridiculous. And I really sometimes try to speak my mind and say, hey, I'm an able-bodied person who has time to be able to help with this. What about the people who are sick or injured or whatever, and they're trying to get this help, and it's a headache. It's got a long way to go.
I remember watching my mother help the VA with my father when he actually wound up basically in residence at a VA facility. And she would tell me about how much she had to do just to help the staff get work done. And I know when I visited him when I went home on occasions, I mean, they were trying, but they were just overwhelmed by the number of people and the conditions that of the patients as well as the facilities they were in. So I don't have any trouble imagining what it was like back in the late 60s with these guys coming home.
Yeah, you know, like you said, Chris, I don't have any trouble imagining it, but at the same time, I have all the trouble in the world imagining it. I just don't understand. And it doesn't matter if they're vets or not. How can you treat people like that regardless? And I get it, lack of funding, and especially at that point in the Vietnam War, you know, and it even came out with the one orderly who just basically got almost in a fight with Ron, that he doesn't care about the war. He doesn't care about these baby killers, quote unquote. You know, and so you have, not only do you have a serious lack of funding, but you also have people there who you are not their first priority. It doesn't matter how bad a shape you're in. That was one of the scenes, Russell, that I just could not watch all the way through in one sitting. It probably took me close to an hour just to watch that. What was it, 20 minutes? I just kept having to stop it and walk away and get myself in a different headspace, because I was just really getting upset, depressed. It was just a really tough thing to watch. And, you know, as much as I asked the question, was that an accurate portrayal? I knew it was, but God, I was really hoping that everybody would come back and say no. But I got the answer I was expecting.
Also, I don't know about back then, but right now, having been in a lot of hospitals, VA and outside, there are a lot of people of color in the positions that those people were working. And I don't think people realize that the people who help situations are in our country themselves.
You kind of cut out there, Lisa, but are you saying that those people who were trying to help are the ones that are kind of getting dumped on? Is that kind of the overall?
No, I said, in the movie, they were mostly African-American people on the staff.
Mhm.
And now, even today, having been in a lot of hospitals, VA and outside, there are a lot of people of color and a lot of immigrants who fill those positions in the hospitals as service people to everyone. And I don't think that unless you're in a hospital that you realize that they are really holding up a lot of America in our medical and our healthcare facilities.
Like I said, you were cutting out there, so that important point that you just said didn't come through, but I'm glad it came through the second time for sure.
Can
Okay.
I add something to that? In relation
Absolutely,
to
Mark, go
film?
ahead.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the portrayal of non-whites, the non-white people, as you mentioned, it seemed to be so negative in the hospital scenes. But then I recalled that the guy who saved him on the battlefield was black.
Mhm.
And I noticed that the guy who also carried him to safety during the protests when the police were attacking the vets was also black. So I think that the filmmakers were trying to, balance that. And back to the hospital, there was a white doctor who came and explained to him that they weren't getting enough equipment, and then he'd have to go scour the basement to see if he could find something. So I think that also helped the viewer to understand it wasn't just bad people in the hospital.
Yeah, and of course, as we all know, this is a time of racial disparity. There's race riots going on all over the place, both within the military and without. Not only centered around the war, but around economic and social issues as well. And I really didn't pay that much attention to that particular aspect as I was watching the film, but I'm glad everybody's bringing that up. I would say that I'll pay attention to that a little more the next time I watch it, but I don't think I'm gonna watch that movie again, honestly. We are starting to run out of time. I do want to make sure we get through all of our points here. So after Ron gets out of the VA hospital, he returns back home, his family home. His mom and dad and brother and sister are there to greet him. Also, the neighbors come out. What was the overall impression? Did you feel really uncomfortable during that scene for everybody who was involved, not just Ron, but everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
It's a situation where it's sort of like I worked in a hospital. It's sort of like a situation where somebody has cancer or someone has Alzheimer's disease. People don't know how to deal with it, so they try their best to be polite and come up with something to say, but they really just want to get away.
Hmm. Yeah,
and that's how I saw that.
The one thing that stuck with me was everybody said, "Oh, you look good. Oh, you look good." Here I am paralyzed in a wheelchair, never going to walk again for the rest of my life. Thanks for telling me I look good. I appreciate that.
And I mean, that's what I'm saying. People try to be polite at those points in time in life because they don't know what to say. I mean, what do you say? Oh my God, you look horrible. I'm so sad for you. It's difficult to come up with it as even now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are no words that will meet that situation. I felt kind of sorry for both parents and Ron. He wasn't ready to get dumped into that mess.
Yeah, and we maybe we see a little bit of that now, or probably not a little bit, probably a lot more than a little bit nowadays with our veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Although, this is, we're done kind of with both of those conflicts, but still, how many people did you see come home from those two conflicts that had life-altering injuries? I think maybe we're along a better course now where everybody says thank you, or something along those lines, as opposed to some fake, "Oh, you look great." No, you don't look great. You look like hell, but thank you for what you did for us. I think maybe our attitudes have maybe advanced a little bit, maybe a little bit faster than VA care, but our attitudes have advanced. as far as how we recognize and accept our veterans back into our communities after they've done their service, especially if they're in.
And that scene also, the thing that struck me about that, a couple of things. One was that Kovic is trying to maintain that air of normalcy too. It's not just one way.
I can do it.
Yeah, he's fine. He's smiling. He's he's looking around at all these folks. But I also kind of wondered whether part of their reaction to him might have had to do with what was happening in the country at that time, which was a souring on the war already. And so how do you greet somebody who's come back from a war you're not really sure about anymore?
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Our veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, they didn't have to face that when they came back from Desert Storm. That wasn't an issue. Everybody was flag waving, and we were doing the right thing. Vietnam's really like a war that we've never really fought before or since, quite honestly. And it's really hard to grapple with all the issues that go into every aspect of it, particularly when you're talking about the veterans coming back and being spit on and flipped off and called horrible names, and receiving this type of health care. Let's carry that particular mindset into this question here. At what point does Ron begin to question his support for the war and his patriotism? Where do you think that comes in the film? Because it certainly comes in, and we see it clearly by the end of the film. But at what point during the film do you think it really resonates with Ron that he's, at least in his mind, been on the wrong side this whole, for lack of a better word?
I think it started, at least as I was watching, when he's in the parade, and then he's asked to speak from the platform, and he sees not just people for him and against him, or for and against the war in the crowd, but he starts to hallucinate. I know he saw a couple older men with Indian chief, feathers, and headdress. And so the film was, pointing to the much larger historical context that he'd been swept up in, of colonization abroad, like colonization here, and the very complex ways in which, he was now seen by some as a hero, and yet then when he started speaking, he heard the baby crying that he had left, abandoned in the village. And so it seemed to me, through those hallucinations as well as his position there, he started to change.
One thing I would say about the VA is that their mental health is improved greatly. I mean, the PTSD and all that kind of stuff, it's taken very seriously, and they've really added quite a few people that work on mental health issues. So it's another positive for the VA.
Yeah, even up to the point of the Vietnam War, and maybe even a little bit further, PTSD wasn't a thing. Shell shock, and it's something that a couple days rest, you'll get over it, no problem. But we really start to see that in Vietnam, people coming back and they're not able to escape these demons. And we read about so many accounts of veterans waking up in the middle of the night to them, choking their significant other, or yelling and screaming, or just having these, just really episodes that we can't wrap our heads around. And fortunately, you're right, Mike. Fortunately, it's been taken seriously over the past 30 years. A lot of work has gone into identifying, where these problems stem from. How do we correct them? But can you imagine coming back from World War I? I mean, there was absolutely nothing that they did for you except put you in a mental hospital. That was it. And that was probably even more traumatic than the experience itself. So yeah, fortunately, VA has come a long way as far as that goes. I use VA myself. I've never had a bad experience with the VA. I know several of the people that I've served with who have not had the greatest experiences, but at least as far as mental health goes and mental hygiene, they've certainly come a long way since, gosh, even, since the Vietnam War. And thank goodness, because that's one of the biggest steps. You could deal with physical wounds, the mental wounds are much harder to cope.
In the film, when did his girlfriend help him move into that anti-Vietnam feeling, because she was involved in the anti-war program? Because when they had that scene, he didn't reject her. He didn't seem that upset by the fact that she was, participating in an anti-war, and
How I took that scene, Russell, was he was, just like with his brother and even with his parents, they had their own ideas, their own thoughts about everything that was going on. And he's okay with different ideas and different thoughts. I think the one point where he really started to turn is where he saw the police just come in and start brutally beating everybody who was even just peacefully protesting. They pulled out their riot sticks and they just started clubbing away. And I think, for me anyway, that was when he really started to go, wait a minute, what's going on here? We're supposed to have this ability to peacefully protest. Here we are doing it, and we're being brutalized for nothing. I think, in my mind at least, when I watched the film, that was where he started to have the change of heart. And
it's kind of interesting too in that scene, for a little Vera, to make the scene kind of truthful. Abby Hoffman was actually the person that led that riot. Or
as soon as I saw him, I said, "That's Abby Hoffman.
Yeah.
That's not a stand-in or a double. That's him."
Right. Well, Ron Kovic was actually in that first parade scene in the movie. Yeah. He was in the parade there. He was one of the veterans in the wheelchair nearest the camera, and each time the firecrackers went off, he would jump a little bit.
Like I said, we are getting late.
Stone had a cameo too early in the film.
Yeah.
Who did?
Stone.
The director, Oliver Stone.
Oh yeah, he was an interviewer,
interviewing somebody on the TV.
Yeah. We only got a couple minutes left. First of all, I want to point out the director and the cinematographer before we go any further. Oliver Stone and Robert Richardson. I'm a huge Robert Richardson fan. I know I don't talk about him a great deal, but he's filmed so many movies that I find so influential. But I was really surprised to go through the relationship between Oliver Stone and Robert Richardson. This particular movie was their 5th movie that they had filmed together. Up to 1997, they filmed 11 movies together between 86 and 97. So in an 11-year period, they filmed 11 movies together, one a year. That's really not made for some great filmmaking. When you have that director-cinematographer combination so often, you really know each other. The cinematographer knows what to expect from the director. The director knows what he's going to get from the cinematographer. The movies that they've worked on, and I'll put them in order, starting in 1986, Salvador, Platoon, Wall Street, Talk Radio, Born on the 4th of July, Doors, JFK, Heaven and Earth, Natural Born Killers, Nixon, and then finishing up with U-Turn in 1997. Not only is that a lot of movies to put together as a duo in a 10-year span, but that's such a strange dichotomy of movies as well. So it's such a broad aspect and such a broad focus of what they're all looking at. I was just really impressed with that. I didn't know that they had collaborated so much on films together. And like I said, if you're not familiar with Robert Richardson, A Few Good Men, Casino, and the one I'm going to watch here in a few minutes, Inglourious Bastards, he's really a great cinematographer. He doesn't have his own real style, so to speak, because he kind of caters himself to the director, whether it's Tarantino, Oliver Stone, Scorsese, whoever. He knows what each director wants, and he knows how to approach that. And I think for a cinematographer, that's fantastic. Academy Award winner, Robert Richardson, BAFTA winner. He's just had a fantastic career. Check him out. And he's kind of a funky old dude as well. So, that's always interesting. I hope to be a funky old dude someday myself. And then, of course, Oliver Stone, little known fact, he did serve in Vietnam for over a year. He was a rifleman. He was out there in the bush fighting just like the regular soldiers. So he does bring this experience to him. And like Chris was saying, this is kind of his bookend 2 movies, Platoon, showing what life was like out there, and then Born on the 4th of July, what it's like for those troops to come home. I just thought that was a really strange but fantastic combination, and a really great way to approach this particular part of history. I'm not a huge...
Excuse me, but Stone made a 3rd film about Vietnam, Heaven and Earth, and I haven't seen it, but it seemed...
I haven't
just
seen that
reading
one either,
about
but
it,
you're right, there
seemed
is
to
a
be about the
trilogy.
Vietnamese experience. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There is that trilogy, and I haven't seen Heaven and Earth either. I really like Platoon. I wasn't a big fan of Born on the 4th of July, so I'm not so sure that I'm going to go out and really, seek Heaven and Earth and watch it. But as a movie buff, I probably will at some point. Chris, have you seen Heaven and Earth?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I just wanted to bring up those 2 points. And then before we go, it's 8:02 now. I don't want to hold everybody up for too much longer, but my last and most famous question of the night, and we'll start with you, Russell, because you're first on my list. Who was your favorite character and why?
Well, I mean, it would have to be, the Tom Cruise, Ron Kovic character. I mean, there's just nobody else that had the screen time and the screen gravitas that he'd had, and he did a wonderful job. I've not really seen Tom Cruise. I think I saw one of the Top Gun films, and he was good in that, but he was excellent in this.
Chris?
Tom Cruise, to me, without a question. Although, as a side note, I like Kara Sedgwick. I like her as an actor to begin with. But I thought the one particular scene that I thought really worked well was the prom night scene where she dances with Cruise. Just her reaction to that whole scene. The other thing I want to say about Tom Cruise was I went and looked at his filmography, and I had not realized how many really good films he has done over the years, including some that people don't really know about. But it's just extraordinary, the quality of the films that he's done. And your question had to do with whether, I think whether this was his finest work. I think it probably is, but there are a lot of other movies that he's done that are pretty darn close.
Sally?
Tom Cruise.
Okay.
I don't like him as an actor, but I loved him in this role.
All
I
right.
thought he played it excellent. But he was very believable.
How about you, Mike?
Same. I found him, I could identify him right away, growing up at that time period. You just were, Joe gun ho,
And Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I would name that main character too, but I found very interesting, and I liked and didn't like Charlie, played by Willem Dafoe
Yeah.
in the Mexico
Oh,
scenes,
yeah.
because he's the kind of trickster, who helped Kovic to connect with the prostitute and feel that, human nurturing, but then that was also false. And then they had that crazy, wrestling in the sand in the desert, which I mean,
Bizarre.
I thought this is ridiculous, this is absurd, but then I realized after the whole film was over, that was kind of an important comical or tragic comical ridiculousness of his passion and what he was hanging on to and had to let go of.
I think that was certainly a very clear point in his resurrection. The kind of ridiculous wrestling scene where they're both out of their wheelchairs. You're right. I found it kind of a strange scene to watch, but you're right. It really set the tone for Tom Cruise going, wait a minute, this is not who I want to be. This is not who I aspired to be to begin with. And I'm not going to let this take over my life. I can do much better than this. And I think that's why Willem Dafoe's character, or his presence in the film was so short, is he was that bridge, I think. I found him to be one of my favorite characters in the film, but it's not my turn to answer yet. Lisa?
I'm not a big Tom Cruise fan, I didn't feel, I know.
We only caught some of that, Lisa. You really are, you're cutting in and out. Jose, who was your favorite character in the film?
Oh, I would like to say also William Dafoe, but I noticed, I conclude saying that that the main character was my favorite character because of the range of I don't know, yeah, all of the range of acting he has made. But there was one thing that I noticed, and it was as young as is acting in this movie, when he gets a kind of in trouble, he uses his hand. And I see using this kind of characterization in many movies, but seeing this, doing this at such a young age, that really likes me. Thank you.
That's a good point, Jose. You know, I did not particularly care for Tom Cruise's acting in this film, and I didn't think it was a very good performance. I thought most of it was over the top. But Jose brings up a good point. He's a very young actor at this point. He is not the established bona fide Hollywood star. And for him to show this range of emotion and some of the things he does on screen at such a young age, I hadn't thought of that before, Jose, but I think you're probably maybe on point there. Maybe I'll give him a little more credit for this role than I had previously. Like I said, I already liked the Willem Dafoe character. I also thought Frank Whaley was a good conduit for several parts of the film. He was the one who was out there after Tom Cruise came back. He was the one sitting out in the yard with them at the fire at night, drinking beer, and they were both talking about their experiences. He hadn't had the opportunity to talk about his experiences like that before. I think Frank Whaley is a very fine actor. He always has very small parts, so he kind of goes unnoticed. But I think Frank Whaley is a very fine actor, and I think he really brought some parts of this movie together, although he wasn't in a whole lot of it. Well, okay, it is already 10 after 8. Like I said, I don't want to keep everybody around for the rest of the night. I want you going to your Friday nights, get your weekend started. I hope everybody stays cool. We're going to try our best here in Madison. I don't know where everybody else is at. Lisa, I know where you're at. And wow, good luck staying cool down there.
Hot.
I can imagine.
I want to apologize for all the technical.
Don't even worry about it. Sometimes you get good reception, sometimes we don't. It's just the way it goes with this technology that we're dealing with nowadays.
Next month's movie?
Oh, good grief, Chris, I forgot to look it up.
Gallipoli.
Huh?
Gallipoli.
With Mel Gibson.
Oh,
Yep.
while you're looking, I'm gonna say something real quick while you're looking.
Sure.
So last summer, my son serves, and he was part of an air show in England, and Tom Cruise was there, and he has a photo in the cockpit of the plane with Tom Cruise and a couple other friends.
How cool is that? You know,
It's
like I said,
cool.
don't get me wrong. I like Tom Cruise as an actor. I just don't think that he did a bang up job in this film. He's done fantastic roles before. He has done some magnificent roles. Some of them are, you know, hilarious. Some of them are very serious. A lot of his action movies, of course, we all know those. And so I would be over the moon if I met him, for sure.
He had sunglasses and a suit, and I had to verify with my son that it wasn't a cutout, a cardboard cutout.
Eric, have you seen Collateral?
Yeah, I saw it once. And that in the Jack Reacher film, I didn't really care too much. I tell you, one of my favorite Tom Cruise roles, though, is in Tropic Thunder, where he's the movie executive. If you have not seen Tropic Thunder, it's a crass role that he has, and he does such a good job as being this alter ego who's egregious and over the top. It's just fantastic. Of course, all his Mission Impossible movies, but I think my favorite movie that he's done, of course, is A Few Good Men. He just, that's a drama that he sells and knocks out of them. At least for my 2 cents.
What was that film again?
Tropic Thunder.
No, the other one that you was talking about, Tom Cruise.
Oh, A Few Good Men.
You good
Oh,
men.
Few Good Men. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen that, it's a courtroom style military drama. It's very, very good. Very good.
He also
Jack
seems,
Nicholson, Demi Moore.
he also seems to have a penchant for the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. If you look at the caps in his movies.
Well, just baseball in general. He's a big baseball
Yeah,
player.
yeah.
So, and then like Chris definitely pointed out, next month's movie is Gallipoli, Mel Gibson, about the Anzac invasion of basically Turkey. That is, I haven't seen that movie in a while. I look forward to watching it again. I have really enjoyed it the times that I have seen it. I hope everybody else does too. And I hope we see you back again next month for that one. And obviously, you can always find any of our events, not just our movie nights, but our trivia nights and all the other virtual events we do on our website, wisvetsmuseum.com/events. And of course, you can always email me with any questions or suggestions you might have. I'm always open to questions or suggestions, particularly when it comes to movie nights. And I hope everybody else has a great rest of your weekend. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time.